Well, good afternoon and welcome to another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. If you like our content, please like, share with like-minded friends and subscribe to the channel. To date, we have 3 series available for your review. First, the history of the English Bible, which includes many videos on Bible translations and the translators, how they worked, what were their qualifications, and their final product, how was it received. We covered the likes of Tyndale, Luther, Erasmus, and many others. The Great Bible, the Geneva Bible, the King James Bible, even more modern translations with the ASV, the Revised Standard Version, New International Version, English Standard Version, and more. We even cover single author translations from the likes of the Moffat Bible, E.J. Goodspeed's translation, Kenneth Taylor's The Living Bible, and others. Our second series is Manuscript Hunters and Collectors, and it features episodes on the likes of those men and women who went into dangerous places and sometimes at risk to their own life to search out and find for the future biblical manuscripts that had lain hidden for 1,000 years or more. People such as Robert Curzon, Tischendorf, the Sisters of Sinai, Solomon Schechter, and others are covered. And third, our current series, Cities of the New Testament. And today we have covered Jerusalem, Nazareth, Capernaum, Bethsaida, and today's episode will feature Cana in Galilee. And as of today, we have a total of 73 long-form videos, 27 short-form. I am experimenting with AI-generated podcasts that summarize each episode, and I'd like your feedback on those. I'll put those out available to you. I assure you that these AI-generated podcasts are really quite interesting, and I make sure that they are accurate as well. They are based on sources that I specifically curate for each episode. They're great for listening if you're driving or if you're at home with your smartphone in your hand, you have a few minutes. They're generally 15 to 30 minutes long, with a few maybe longer. I review them myself before sending them out, and I want to make sure that they are accurate, that the information contains is true, not misleading, and it has no AI-generated artifacts or false and misleading information. More series and videos are forthcoming, so stay tuned to the League of Biblical Enthusiasts. Today's episode turns on determining which location in Israel is the true biblical Cana in Galilee. We entitled the episode Silent Witness, Locating Biblical Cana. Like Bethsaida, Cana in Galilee was lost to history for centuries, until a recent archaeological discovery brought to light an artifact that many believes settles this question once and for all. Now, the New Testament, John, in the Gospel of John, is our only record of Cana in Galilee, and he mentions it 4 times. And he always refers to Cana as Cana in Galilee, not just Cana. So first in John chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, we read the famous story of the wedding in Cana, where Jesus turned the water into wine. And that story contains details of the marriage ceremony that will become important in the archaeological record. Next, in chapter 2, John tells us that this miracle of turning water into wine was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. In ancient Israel, a wedding was not just a wedding where you came for an hour to watch the ceremony and then go home. It was a huge social and communal event, often lasting for days. The wedding coordinator could either be praised for organizing a very smooth event or judged harshly for missing and forgetting important details like how much food to prepare. Is there enough wine available to drink for the crowd over the last several days that the feast lasted? And this is actually the backdrop of the story that we read in John chapter 2. Now, a third mention of Cana is in John chapter 4 and involves the incident where Jesus healed the son of a royal official. This took place in Cana in Galilee. And lastly, in John 21, we are informed that Nathanael, one of the 12, was from Cana in Galilee. So let's turn our attention to that wedding in Cana. What was it like? How does it inform our understanding of Jesus and his ministry? Whose wedding was it? How many people were there? Did Jesus or any of his disciples know the host or some of the guests? So many questions. We can only speculate. The wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. The question is, can we identify Cana on a map of Israel today? Historically, 4 different sites have claimed to be biblical Cana. We will concentrate on just the 2 most likely sites, and we'll approach this in 3 ways. First, the history of locating Cana in Galilee. Secondly, the 2 most likely candidates that we'll investigate are Kfar Qana and Khirbet Qana. And thirdly, why we believe Khirbet Qana is probably the true site of Cana in Galilee. But first, let's take an aerial view and some maps of the area in the Galilee where these 2 sites are located. Khirbet Qana, which is Arabic for ruins of Cana, is today an uninhabited hill rising some 330 feet above the floor of the Beit Netofa Valley. You can see here the hill and ancient ruins on the south side. And I'm showing also a couple of photos of the Beit Netofa Valley. And Kfar Qana, which is Arabic for village of Cana, is 5 miles south of Khirbet Qana. And Kfar Qana is an inhabited city with a long history and population of about 25,000 in today, 2025. Now, other sites have been understood in the past as biblical Cana. For example, Eusebius provides us with an example. He wrote in his work, the Onomasticon, and that work was produced sometime before 324 AD. And his Onomasticon is an alphabetical listing of place names mentioned in the Bible and identified with sites contemporary to him. Eusebius identified Cana with the site that is in today's Lebanon, and Jerome followed him in this error. It is surely not the correct site, and he likely confused the name with an Old Testament village named Cana in Joshua 19, verse 28. In any event, Eusebius provided us no topographical details, and Stephen Notley, a historical geographer, has said that Eusebius's knowledge of the Galilee was limited. Nonetheless, Lebanese Christians to this day still believe that their Cana in southern Lebanon is biblical Cana, and it remains a popular tourist site commemorating the miracle at the wedding. But it is not a serious candidate in the eyes of historical geographers of the Bible or modern archaeologists. Another site has been explored by archaeologist Jordana Alexandre. She believes the site that she excavated at Karm el Raz, which is the western part of Kfar Qana, is precisely identified by Josephus, although other scholars do not agree with this specific identification. In any event, our episode will focus on the 2 sites that have historically been favored, Kfar Qana and Khirbet Qana. Let's consider some ancient sources and pilgrim reports. Josephus reports in his autobiography, section 86, that during his time as a general in the early days of the war, he was quartered for a time at a village called Cana. He further states that his stay in Cana was in the plain of Asochus, which is identified with today's Beit Netofa Valley, which happens to be where Khirbet Qana is located. The earliest pilgrim tradition favors Khirbet Qana as biblical Cana in Galilee. Theodosius, in the 6th century, reports that, quote, it is 5 miles from Caesarea to Cana of Galilee. Sepphoris was renamed Caesarea around 120 AD during Hadrian's reign, and Khirbet Qana alone fits this detail. The anonymous pilgrim of Piacenza, we referred to this individual in our last episode on Bethsaida, traveled from Ptolemais to Caesarea, which was also formerly Sepphoris, and he says that, quote, 3 miles further, we reached Cana where the Lord attended a wedding. Then we arrived at Nazareth. Now, this favors a journey north to south, and Khirbet Qana lies southward on the Acre, Cana, Sepphoris, Nazareth road. The monk Epiphanius of the 8th century notes that the distance from Tiberias to Mount Tabor is a day's journey, and from Tabor to Cana in Galilee is another day's travel. It happens that the distance from Tiberias to Tabor is about 12 miles, and that's also the distance from Mount Tabor to Khirbet Qana. A couple of Crusader reporters have also been important to us. A Bellard of Ascoli was a pilgrim who visited the Holy Land around 1155 CE. He provided his description of Cana. His account was documented in his work entitled The Jerusalem Pilgrimage, written in the 12th century, and he identified a specific cave complex near modern Khirbet Qana as the location of the marriage at Cana. He described a large crypt or cave that could fit about 50 people, an account which aligns with other pilgrim reports. Ceolwulf of the 12th century was the first English pilgrim to Jerusalem following its conquest in the First Crusades. He also supports the site of Khirbet Qana as he described Cana as north of Nazareth. Bouchard of Mount Sion, a late 13th century German priest, Dominican friar, pilgrim, and author, traveled to the Middle East and at the end of the 13th century wrote a book called Description of the Holy Land. He mentions a veneration site and says, quote, the place is shown to this day where the 6 water pots stood and the dining room where the tables were placed. In summary, the earliest pilgrim reports point to Khirbet Qana as biblical Cana in Galilee. Early maps also confirm Khirbet Qana as biblical Cana. They consistently locate Cana north or west of Sepphoris. One of the earliest maps to render the land of Palestine was included in Marino Sanuto's work entitled Book of the Secrets of the Faithful to the Cross on the Recovery and Protection of the Holy Land. Sanuto composed the work in 1321 and presented it to the Pope in hopes of inspiring him to mount another crusade. The book included several maps drawn by Petrus Visconti, a cartographer, and Visconti's map locates Cana directly north of Sepphoris in line with Khirbet Qana. William Way, W-E-Y, a 15th century English traveler and author, produced a map of the Holy Land in 1462, which places Cana directly north of Sepphoris. Here is his map, but note that the orientation left to right is really north to south from our point of view. Now let's move to more modern times. In 1838, Edward Robinson, known as the father of biblical geography, visited the Holy Land and believed that Khirbet Qana was biblical Cana. One piece of evidence that convinced him was pointed out to him by his Arab friend, who noted that Khirbet Qana was called by the locals Cana of Galilee, meaning Cana of Galilee, and is the exact meaning and rendering of the phrase Cana in Galilee in the Arabic New Testament. His story is reported in his popular Biblical Researches in Palestine, Volume 3, page 205. Other explorers agree with Robinson's identification. William M. Thompson, a Protestant missionary, Palestine and Syria, lived 30 years in the region and published observations of his travels in his work entitled The Land and the Book, published 1859. And I'm showing a picture of the 1872 cover. So we can summarize our findings to this point like this. The earliest traditions, pilgrim records, Byzantine and Crusader visitors, and maps of the Holy Land all agree that Khirbet Qana was believed to be the true biblical Qana. However, something changed. And from the mid-17th century until relatively recent times, opinion shifted away from Khirbet Qana to the other nearby site, Kfar Qana. And how did this change in opinion come to pass? Well, scholars believe there are three reasons. Number one, accessibility and pilgrim convenience. Kfar Qana was more conveniently located on the main pilgrim route from Nazareth to Tiberias. Pilgrimage routes prioritized ease of access, especially as the Holy Land became more dangerous for travelers. The Franciscan order managed Christian pilgrimage in this area and facilitated easy passage to Kfar Qana and its Franciscan church, rather than focusing on historical accuracy. The papal emissary to Palestine, a man named Francesco Quaresimo, identified Kfar Qana as biblical Cana, and from this point on in the 17th century, it became common to think of Kfar Qana as biblical Cana. Second, the population and decline of Khirbet Qana. Between 1630 and 1640, Khirbet Qana became depopulated and fell into ruins, and remains that way even today in 2025. Very difficult to reach. It's 330 feet above the ground. It's thistles, thorns, rocks, and frankly, if you're not careful, you can hurt yourself traveling up that hillside, and some have. Its physical decline and difficult terrain led to its abandonment as a pilgrimage destination. And third, presence of a church in Kfar Qana. Kfar Qana has a church, which was a significant factor for visitors on the pilgrimage, while Khirbet Qana did not have an active church at that time, and the presence of the church made Kfar Qana a more believable and appealing site. Now, with that, we move to our second section, comparing the two sites, Kfar Qana and Khirbet Qana. We begin with Kfar Qana. It has a long-standing Christian tradition. Kfar Qana is located approximately 4 miles northeast of Nazareth and has been the more widely accepted site among Christian traditions since, as we mentioned, the 17th century. Its identification is supported by continuous habitation and historical references dating back to the Byzantine period. Archaeological excavations by the Antiquities Authority in Kfar Qana have uncovered remains of a settlement from the Kingdom of Israel period, the 10th and 9th centuries BCE, and later Jewish settlement from the early Roman period in the 1st century. Discoveries there have included a section of a city wall, building remains, pottery vessels, animal bones, and underground pits linked by tunnels, which suggests a Jewish settlement existing prior to the Great Revolt of 66. Now let's think about it. While these arguments explain Kfar Qana's traditional acceptance and offer some archaeological backing, it is important to note that many sources indicate that the archaeological evidence for a thriving Roman-era Jewish settlement at Kfar Qana is not as robust as that is found at Khirbet Qana. The decision to favor Kfar Qana in the 17th century was largely influenced by factors of convenience and the decline of Khirbet Qana, rather than purely historical and archaeological evidence. Now let's look at evidence for Khirbet Qana as biblical Cana in Galilee. Ernest William Gurney Masterman, lived 1867 and died 1943, was for a time president of England's Royal Geographical Society and lived for more than 20 years in Damascus and in Jerusalem, where he became surgeon to the English hospital. He was honorary secretary in Palestine for the Palestine Exploration Fund. In 1910, he wrote an account of a visit he made that year to Khirbet Qana. And here's what he had to say, and I quote, "The fact is, the remains lie on a rounded hill isolated on all sides. The site is an important one, easily defended in olden days, as its sides are everywhere steep and the hills around at a considerable distance. The remains, however, of real antiquity lie at a higher level, a point of which several writers appear to be unaware. excavated in the strata of softer limestone running some yards below the summit, or a number of rock-cut cave tombs. I visited as many as 6 in a few minutes. The roughly level hilltop is pierced in all directions with ancient cisterns. I saw over a dozen, and many more have their mouths hidden by earth or brushwood. There are extensive foundations of walls in all directions and several large holes where vaults have fallen in. The whole surface is covered with small fragments of Roman pottery. It may be taken as certain that there was here a small but important and strongly situated town in New Testament times. End quote. His observations then of that desolate hill, Khirbet Qana, made 115 years ago, hold true even today in 2025. Now, he did not conduct a proper excavation, but his excellent on-the-spot observations would be confirmed by a modern team of archaeologists. And to that story we now turn. Modern-day excavations at Khirbet Qana began in 1998 by the late Professor Douglas Edwards of the University of Puget Sound. Dr. Edwards received his PhD in New Testament and Christian origins from Boston University, where he also took several courses in the Department of Archaeology. His first venture into field archaeology occurred when he was an area supervisor at Sepphoris in Israel in 1986, where he worked another 6 years. In 1998, he began ongoing excavations at Khirbet Qana. Dr. Thomas McCollough, then professor of religion and history at Centre College in Kentucky, joined the excavation as field director in the year 2000 and became co-director in 2008 after Dr. Edwards' untimely death in November of that year due to a lengthy battle with cancer. Mordecai Aviam also participated in the excavations, and as we noted in our last episode on Bethsaida, Dr. Aviam is currently director of the dig at El Araj, which is believed to be biblical Bethsaida, and this summer they were planning to begin their yearly 2 digs, one in midsummer and one in the fall. As we're all aware, the events of the last several days between Israel and Iran have put these things to a halt. And I've just noticed a few minutes ago that the State Department has advised no travel to Israel at this time. And I'm confident that unfortunately, many excavations will be halted and delayed. But Dr. Aviam was involved in the archaeological investigations at Khirbet Qana from the beginning. Now, he did not participate in the digs per se, but he provided on-site expert information to assist the team as an advisor. He was also able to gain the license to dig there from the Israeli Antiquities Authority. Now, the most accessible information regarding the findings and interpretations of the Khirbet Qana excavations are found in Dr. McCollough's article in the November-December 2015 issue of Biblical Archaeology Review. Here's a picture of that cover page. In his article, which we will use as our primary source in this section, Dr. McCollough freely admits that they have not found a sign yet that declares you are now entering Cana, but there is a high degree of confidence that it certainly looks that way. He notes that the architectural remains go back to the Hellenistic period and continue through the Hasmonean and Roman periods and beyond. It was a vibrant Jewish village in the 1st century, interconnected with other nearby Jewish villages in Lower Galilee. The coins recovered in the Hellenistic and Roman occupation strata clearly point to a Jewish population. Several structures also point to a Jewish village in the Roman period. A large building, some 68 by 48 feet, was located on the Acropolis of the hill and dates from the late 1st or early 2nd century. This building had 2 rows of interior columns, benches along the sides, and finely plastered floors and walls. They correlate with other structures found in this period identified as synagogues. And keep in mind that synagogues in the early Roman period typically served as a communal meeting place where many kind of social activities took place. Synagogues, as a building solely dedicated to Torah reading, instruction, and prayer, came about sometime later. In addition, several mikvaot, ritual immersion pools, were also found. Numerous fragments of stone vessels found there indicate the inhabitants were Jewish because Jews believed that stone vessels were impervious to ritual impurity. Unlike clay vessels, stone was considered immune to impurity because it is not as absorbent and not mentioned as impure in the Torah. Therefore, they became popular in ritual contexts, especially for hand washing and storing ritually clean food in the home. So we can confidently conclude that the village of Khirbet Qana was a first century Jewish village. Now, does that make it biblical Cana? No. It's necessary, but not sufficient. However, near the end of their very first excavation season, an accidental discovery reveals something that for many solidified Khirbet Qana as biblical Cana in Galilee. They came upon an opening to a cave at the base of a fig tree. Side note, Jesus said he saw Nathanael, who we know was from Cana, sitting under a fig tree. End side note. Now, the cave was filled with dirt and sheep and goat dung, but they could see plaster on the walls inside and faint traces of Greek graffiti. The cave was roughly circular, about 20 feet in diameter, 8 feet tall at the middle, and oriented east-west. The interior was covered with several layers of plaster. Greek graffiti on the walls and ceiling read Kyrie Yesu, meaning Lord Jesus. They eventually realized this cave was just one of 4 interconnecting caves in the underground complex. Only the first one has been explored to date. And Dr. McCollough has told me that the other 3 certainly will be investigated in the future. If not by his team, certainly someone else. It would make an amazing work and dissertation for someone to undertake that excavation. It was designated Cave 1. And in that cave, they found on the western side a bench that could seat 8 to 12 people, 8 to 10 people. On the eastern side was an apse-like curve that was blocked with a reused sarcophagus lid. And Dr. McCollough informs me that it was a sarcophagus lid because they found the sarcophagus itself nearby in the remains. It was turned onto its side in the cave that served as some kind of altar, perhaps. It was covered with several layers of plaster and bore a chiseled Maltese-style cross on the side that faced visitors. Further investigation revealed the lid displayed had 3 more crosses, and they performed carbon-14 testing on the plaster, which dated it to the 4th or 5th century. Now, most interesting was this discovery. Above the sarcophagus lid, perhaps altar, was a shelf to hold stone jars. 2 jars were found in situ, meaning in their original place. And there was just enough space for 4 more jars. Let's see, that would be 4 plus 2, 6 jars. 6 stone vessels. How many jars did Jesus command to be filled with water? Yes, 6. Now, all of this suggests that they had just discovered, after 1,500 years, an underground Christian cave veneration site dedicated to the memory of Jesus' first miracle. And that miracle took place in Cana in Galilee. And that site they were excavating was Khirbet Qana. The caves housed a memorial to a holy site and are similar to the intricate underground passages in Bethlehem's Church of the Nativity. And here you'll see a picture of those. The shrine they found at Khirbet Qana was obviously built in the belief that this was a place where Jesus turned water into wine. Now think back to one of those early pilgrim accounts, the one from Ballard of Ascoli, who visited this site around 1155. Remember that he described a large crypt or cave that could fit about 50 people, an account which aligns with the discoveries at Khirbet Qana. Dr. McCollough summarizes their argument for Khirbet Qana as biblical Cana in this way. None of the competing sites has the ensemble of evidence that makes such a persuasive case for Khirbet Qana, and this is often the case in archaeological investigations. The material remains are interpreted, and they provide a cumulative case to support your argument. It certainly seems to me that this is true of Khirbet Qana. Although one objection seems to make sense, Khirbet Qana has no natural spring. And this is true. And so, what about water? Where did it come from? But recall, there are numerous cisterns dotting the area, and that may explain the need for such large storage jars found there, and is described in John's account of the wedding. All in all, I leave it up to you to make up your mind. Well, we should wrap this up and say thank you to everyone who subscribed to our channel and sends helpful comments our way. As always, there is so much more that we could have said about Cana in Galilee, the rival sites that compete for its identification today. The rest we have provided for you in various books, archaeological reports, papers, journals, scholarly articles, and popular articles, videos, and interviews with the archaeologists involved. These are all available in the description box we've provided for this episode. You could sit for hours on end poring over the material there. So I hope this episode has been informative and helpful. I encourage you to return to the Gospels, especially the Gospel of John, and read all that Jesus did and said in and around Cana in Galilee. Our next episode will continue this series on cities in the New Testament. Next city to be determined. Which city would you like to see discussed? Please leave a comment and let me know your ideas. Until then, stay healthy, keep curious. Oh, one more thing. Just this morning, I was able to have a Zoom interview with Dr. Thomas McCollough, the lead director in the Khirbet Qana excavation site. And we spent about 45 minutes discussing his work, not only in Khirbet Qana, but in Sepphoris and Shekhin, where he currently is working. He spoke to us from Amman, Jordan, since, as we have noticed already, it's dangerous at this point to be in Israel. And so he is trying to make his way to safer ground. But he was very gracious, and this interview will be available in another episode following this one, and maybe days to a week or so. I want to make sure it presents well for all of you. But it's a great follow-up, because if you have any questions about this video, Dr. McCollough probably has answered them in our talk. He also covered things outside of the Khirbet Qana discussion, which you would also find interesting in the archaeology of Israel. Anyway, look forward to that following this one in about a week or less. So stay healthy, keep curious, and we'll see you soon in the next episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts.